said, SoCal is very excited to be collaborating with the EC today, and just like you all, Savannah and I are really excited to learn more about our guest's background. So thank you.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Michelle. We're really excited to be joined by SoGal today, and we're really excited about the opportunities that they are creating and highlighting for female entrepreneurship. So with that, I think we're ready to jump into our interview. We're really excited to be joined by Yael Kauffman today. Yael is the co-founder and COO of LearnIn, which is the first comprehensive upskilling as a service platform that helps companies solve for every barrier that stands between them and the future of work. She's an investor turned operator and entrepreneur, and she defines herself as a lifelong learner who believes that learning neither begins nor ends with a degree. LearnIn is a seed stage startup with $3.5 million in financing from the leading edtech and future of work VCs, including GSV, Album, Firework Ventures, and Village Global. And it is also co-founded by the founders of the popular learning platform Degreed. Yael began her career as an investor in private equity and was an impact investor and fintech entrepreneur prior to co-founding LearnIn. And once she earned her BS in math and finance with a concentration of entrepreneurship here at the college, she went on to earn her MBA from Harvard Business School. And her passion is for education from a decade of teaching and tutoring. So Yael, thank you so much for joining us. And to get started, I just wanted to ask you, how are you doing as a person and as a founder and a lifelong learner in this difficult and changing moment in time the world finds itself in right now?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much, Savannah and Michelle, for hosting me, and great to meet everyone virtually. And thanks also to the EC and SoGal. Lots of great, exciting entrepreneurial initiatives and support systems at the college now that weren't really there when I was there. So very exciting to see all that happen. I'm doing all right, all things considered, to be honest, in these crazy COVID times. The biggest kind of issue on my side is that I'm taking this call from a laundry room, right? So we're all kind of making do in whatever spaces we have. So I've done my best to kind of keep the other things outside of the field of view, but that is the reality of the times that we live in right now. I've been fortunate enough that my my health, my family, my safety, my living situations have been, all things considered, doing quite well, particularly relative to what so many others are experiencing right now. So my sincerest wish is that everyone is making the most and taking it easy on themselves in this crazy, tumultuous time. This isn't what college was meant to be, be essentially what you signed up for. So just taking care of yourself and taking things one step at a time and going easier on yourself is really important, particularly for all you type A folks out there. You know who you are.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for that advice. I know I definitely feel the same way, so it's glad to hear that you're doing well, all things considered. So now thinking less about the present and moving back to your time at William & Mary, could you kind of go through how your time at William & Mary shaped your personal and professional journey as an entrepreneur and as an investor?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, a lot of my professional journey actually even started before William & Mary. When I say that I developed a passion for education through a decade of teaching and tutoring, that's what I did all throughout high school in Northern Virginia and college in Williamsburg. I taught and tutored to make money to buy Wawa sandwiches while I was in Williamsburg. So that's what I did, and that's how I made ends meet. There's a great department. The math department has a tutoring list, and I started a little business there. And actually, while I was getting my entrepreneurship concentration, there was a class taught by Professor Dick Ash where you would create a business plan. And my business plan at the time was for something that I think I called it varsity math tutors or something like that, where the whole thesis was take my tutoring business of one person and expand it. And the idea would be, hire college kids who were good enough at a certain subject and have them tutor high school kids and be able to have a more affordable rate for the high school kids and make a spread on the college students students who don't maybe necessarily want to go out and find new customers and students. And, everyone needs money for Wawa sandwiches. So at the end of the day, did not end up pursuing that as a business, but it was, probably the first inkling that I had of what would be a long entrepreneurial journey. It wasn't really until well after college that I realized that I had more of the startup itch and more of the entrepreneurial itch, which I ended up pursuing more after business school, quite frankly. But have always been more of an entrepreneurial spirit, and certainly started a few of those initiatives in college. But at the end of the day, like it's such a long life that we all lead, and such a long professional journey, that the first job you have after William and Mary, or really anything else, isn't going to be the last. Almost certainly is not going to be the last. So being able to explore your passions and your interests as you go throughout the journey that is kind of the professional world, I think is really important to make sure that you're feeling fulfilled at every point in time to the best you can.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm actually personally a tutor myself, so I understand that it's not only you're helping out students, but you're also trying to shape your own entrepreneurial spirit in yourself as well. So very cool. In terms of more about Learn In, you define yourselves as an upskilling as a service platform, helping companies solve for every barrier that stands between them and the future of work. Do you think that you can expand a little bit on what upskilling is?
Yeah, sure. So the way that I define upskilling, and a lot of people define it in different ways, is essentially all of the things that you have to do to learn, fine tune your skills, learn new skills, etc., on the job beyond your formal education process. And some of it might be revisiting your formal education down the line. But essentially, when I say I believe that learning neither begins nor ends with a degree, I mean it. At the end of the day, you all will graduate from William and Mary and go off into the world. And you may or may not go back to school in a formal setting, but you will almost certainly continue learning throughout the course of your career. And that will only be more and more true in your lives versus, mine and certainly the generation before, because as the rapid advance of technology continues to go up and to the right, the pace of technological change is just going faster, right? Data science is now a major at William & Mary. It was not when I was there, right? Not at all. And the reality is that there are going to be things, and that was only like 10 years ago, and there are going to be things 10 years from now that we don't even know to think about, right? So the ability to continue learning, to continue leveling up your skills is broadly speaking within the category that I consider upskilling. Now, there's all sorts of things that can take more and less time within that journey, right? So if you're a person who knows how to use Excel really well and you want to kind of level up your skills in analytics, you might teach yourself Python, SQL, or R, right? So that might give you that more robust data analytics tool set. Or if you're a person who is a marketer, you might be good at social media and maybe you want to level up on what types of certifications Google has to understand how to use Google AdWords, other different types of things that are tools in digital marketing, and you might pursue that. And you might pursue that with a variety of Coursera courses, different types of free YouTube videos, everything from that to a professional certificate that might be certified with a company or with a university or any other type of certification entity. And so any of those different types of things, and at the end of the day, you could do what I did and go back to business school. And that's a full-time program. You could do it part-time as well. And you can get your MBA if that's something that you choose to do. And there's any number of different paths that we can all take. And any one person's upskilling journey is really, I think, specific to their own interests, background, and what it is that they're trying to achieve. And so I think it's really important for all of us as we kind of continue in our professional journeys to make sure that we're never really getting stagnant, that we never let our skills just sort of stay flat, because that's when your professional trajectory will essentially stay flat. And so there are certain roles in the professional world today that will be automated away in the next 5 to 10 years. and certainly in the next 20 to 30 years. And so when you think about what that role looks like, there are certain skills that you have that are translatable to any number of other roles. And there are certain things that you can say, hey, I'm really good at customer success and customer service. I'm good at getting on the phone with people. Maybe I can learn how to do sales, or maybe I can learn how to do partnerships and business development, any number of different things that you can explore. And I think kind of having that mindset of growth mindset, right? Understanding that what you know now isn't the end all be all of all the things that you might know or need to know, right? But rather need to continue adding to your toolkit, refreshing your toolkit, getting rid of the old stuff, introducing new stuff. All of that is really, really important to make sure your skills stay fresh, not just in your current role, but for the future. And all of those things tend to get recognized, whether it's something that's through a formal recognition process or a promotion or a raise or any number of those types of things, but really doing it from an outcomes perspective. I'm pretty much outcomes oriented in life, all things like what is the outcome and then work backwards from that. And so being outcomes oriented, I think, is really helpful in understanding, hey, I'm interested in achieving this professional milestone. Great. What are the steps that I need to do to accomplish that, right? Like, what are the jobs I need to have? What are the titles I need to have? What are the skills I need to have? What are the professional certifications I need to have? What are the things that my company might be willing to help me achieve and help me learn in order to achieve that? And that's where Learn In comes from. So happy to go down the road on Learn In essentially, but in a nutshell, where we help companies, and we primarily are targeting large Fortune 500 plus companies with tens of thousands of employees, where that skills gap really matters. Right now, the stats continue to go up and to the right. 80% of CEOs are worried about the availability of skills. Half the workforce is going to have to get upskilled or reskilled in the next few years. And a lot of that is around the digital skills transformation. And companies that hire and fire as their kind of way of accumulating skills will become very obsolete very quickly, because that's an unsustainable strategy. Being able to invest in your companies in a way that invests in your greatest asset, which I believe is your talent, being able to invest in your employees in ways that are actually very aligned to your business outcomes is essentially what we're solving for, right? So companies that are trying to fill these skills gaps have employees. A lot of them have adjacent skills, or a lot of them have the skills existing today. And just being able to put those pieces together and understand, okay, great, this is the ROI. This is your return on investment in investing dollars in these individuals, sending them to different programs. They're more likely to stay your company and be loyal. So increasing retention is a classic benefit. But really, the biggest benefit is oftentimes being able to actually have that skill at your company now. Imagine this is a board level issue for a lot of big companies, and companies spend billions and billions of dollars on a lot of things that don't work, whether it's kind of traditional corporate training programs or MBAs for the sake of it, and just sort of degrees because they're just there, and that's the way that it's been historically. But really, the more modular approach of understanding, what is it really that I need? I want someone who's a new manager to go through a new manager training that has some leadership skills, right? Is there a professional certificate that can do this? All of these different types of pieces are things that you can understand and put people through in a way that is outcomes oriented. So we work with large companies on helping them understand their skills gap and get people from having this skill set to having this skill set, and being able to be more, aligned with what their company's needs are.
Yeah, that's awesome. I especially love that insight, but I love what you said about having a growth mindset and like um, using the word toolkit. 'Cause at the EC, we, try to equip students with the skills and the tools in order that they can take that and apply that to whatever it is, whether it's business or any
Yeah.
other field, science. And so I love that you mentioned that. And kind of along the lines of that, in upskilling, you describe yourself as a lifelong learner. So could you maybe speak a little more about how that personally has you've seen that at play in your life, and how it's affected how you approach entrepreneurship?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of different types of learning that you can have: formal, informal, etc. I'd say probably the most formal structured version of that is that I did, after 4 years in the workforce, go back to get my MBA. And so if you would literally ask me probably 6 months before I applied to business school what I thought about business school, I would have said it was a total colossal waste of time and money. And so I think that having an open mind, right, and being open to changing your mind is really important. But I, for the longest time, was like, I don't need business school. What do I need business school for? There's all sorts of reasons that people choose to go to business school, and I'm happy to kind of go down that path. If anyone is curious about that, we can cover that in the Q&A. But at the end of the day, for me, it was an amazing opportunity to have a structured 2-year period of time where I could really explore my interests and really be able to kind of pursue my passions in a way that didn't leave me encumbered by my current role, my current job, my current industry, et cetera. My first job out of college was in private equity. And so for me, that job was one that I was very excited to have. I had a couple buy-side offers in consulting, and I knew I didn't want to do banking, and that was pretty much the only thing I knew. And I knew that I liked math and I liked finance because it was business with math. And so then I was like, okay, this works. Let's do this. And I took every finance class at the college and did this thesis and all these things. And it was really the intellectual curiosity of it all that really drove my initial move. And then I got to the workforce and I realized that, hey, private equity is not really for me. I wasn't really a cultural fit for that. And it wasn't really the thing that was going to be my passion for the rest of my career. And no one really ever told me like how you look for a job when you have a job. It's very unclear. And so I started honestly like cold emailing a bunch of William & Mary alumni. And so one guy was this guy named Ryan Popple, who was at the Kleiner Perkins Green Growth Fund at the time. I think he's since become the CEO of Proterra and stepped away from that. But he's an alum of the college. And I was like, hey, William & Mary alumna interested in green tech investing. And I sent him this cold email and he was kind enough to respond. And, I will say that the alumni network of William & Mary and any other kind of institutions that you all may be parts of, if you write someone a thoughtful, genuine note that is like personalized and follow up occasionally without being annoying, people will respond. People want to be helpful in general. And he kind of gave me this advice of go get operating experience in a top tier MBA in terms of the most traditional path to venture for people that he had worked with. And I was like, okay, sounds good. And then another guy who I worked with in private equity who had come up through the operating world was like, I think you should give operating a shot. I think you'd be good at it. I think it'd be good for you. And I was like, okay, sounds good. And so I was given an opportunity to work at a portfolio company of the PE fund I was at. And I worked there for 2 years and learned a ton about the way that companies work, which is totally different than the way that private equity funds work. And so each of these roles, I was learning a lot about investing, about operating, about what I like and what I care about and what is important to me in my roles. And I think that self-reflection process is so, so important. And so many of us just end up sort of more passively going through our careers, whereas the biggest sort of piece of advice, I guess, I would have for each of you is to really be intentional to the best of your ability about what it is that you want and what it is that you're trying to solve for. Not just what do you like or like what, those things can kind of change, but to some extent, like what is the vision that you have? And if you don't know, that's fine, right? What you can do in general is optimize for learning, right? So try something new, give something a shot. If you don't like something, don't do something just for the sake of it. And another thing I like to say is like, don't do a thing in order to get another thing, because if you don't want to do this thing, because what if you don't get that thing? You're going to be miserable here. And that's not really a great outcome. And so for me, like being able to understand what I was trying to get out of a role and what the purpose of that role was, make that essentially ROI positive. So to some extent, it's about finding the silver lining and figuring out what's important to you and what you're trying to solve for and learning from every situation. And so when I went to business school, like after these 2 experiences, after my operating experience, I was thinking, okay, I'm more of an investor than an operator. I'm going to go do impact investing because I want to take my investing skill set and invest in businesses that are making the world a better place. I was like, great, clear cut. Let's go figure that out. And so that's what I spent most of my time at HBS doing. And I really, really kind of mapped out the landscape, and I could go on and on about impact investing. I've spent a lot of time in and around the space. I have a lot of views on it. But at the end of the day, for me, when I went through that process, what I found is, hey, actually, what I really, really enjoy is working with entrepreneurs on solving their big problems and helping them build businesses, because that's really cool. And that was the thing that made me realize, hey, you know what? I should probably go work at a Series A company, especially if I want to invest in Series A companies. And then I went from my investing role in early stage mission-driven businesses in VC and venture capital and impact investing into a startup. And that was my first startup experience. And I learned a ton in that startup experience. Pretty much the one thing you can guarantee get out of any startup experience is that you will learn a ton. And so a lot of that will have to do with your job, with the way that companies work, with the way that startups work. Things change constantly. It's really exciting for a lot of people. And then for a lot of people, it's totally unnerving and debilitating. You kind of know pretty early on if you're a startup person. And then some people, if you're a startup person, you kind of get that itch and you can't go back. And so for me, having, had that experience under my belt, the next question was, so I took that business from Series A to exit. And then I was thinking about, okay, well, what do I want to do? And I'd always had this entrepreneurial itch, but for me, it was really, really important to find the right people that I wanted to work with. A team, B idea wins over a B team, A idea any day. And so when I thought about the types of problems I wanted to solve, future of work and education was certainly one of them, though it wasn't the only one. It's an area that's been a personal passion of mine for my whole life, but it wasn't like I was specifically mapping out this landscape. A lot of that came opportunistically when I met my co-founder, David Blake, who founded a really successful company that still exists. It's called Degreed. And it's essentially a business that was very, very innovative in its beginning, putting together a lot of different learning platforms and systems into what is called a learning experience platform that companies use to be their one-stop shop for learning and connect your Coursera courses with your TEDx talks and all these different things to have it in one place where people can go to learn. And then as part of that experience, he had also identified this upskilling opportunity where you can help companies go the rest of the way, right? So not just articles, videos, books, courses, and the small microbytes of learning, but really, and not like just 4-year degree programs or 2-year MBA programs, et cetera, but all the stuff in between where it's really that lifelong learning that is tied to the job that you have, that you want to have, that your company's trying to sponsor you for, et cetera. And so that's where we sort of joined forces about just over a year ago, and co-founded Learn In. So I'd say for me, a lot of that has just been, that's a long-winded way of saying I learned in both formal and informal settings. And like some of the biggest things that I've learned are it's really, really important to create space for yourself to be able to self-reflect and think about what's important to you. Because what's important to you is not necessarily important to the person sitting on your left or right or in the Zoom screen in front of you or whatever. But so any number of things that are important to you can be solved for in any number of ways. And creating that space to be self-reflective and then be able to have that continuous feedback loop will make you more fulfilled over the course of your career versus just sort of having one set path that you expect to be the truth and the only way forward. Because the reality is that all sorts of twists and turns happen and life happens. And, there's a lot of learning that can happen in between.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's a really insightful perspective to take account of, and I think it's a really important perspective to take account of as well. There's so many professionals that people speak to, and they're always saying like, hey, like if I'm going to be hiring someone, I don't care if if you perhaps have this hard skill or this technical skill, but you need to have that willingness and that passion to learn. I think that's something that's really important. So with that being said, what is something that you think an entrepreneurial student should be working on learning right now while in school or while in this very uncertain time that is happening?
Good question. I don't really think that there's any one thing from a hard skill set perspective that is the thing that an entrepreneur should learn, besides perhaps actually just giving it a shot and seeing what it's like to run your own business, be accountable for yourself, and actually try something that might be outside your comfort zone. Because one thing that is for sure is that nothing will prepare you for being an entrepreneur like being an entrepreneur. And even that is not really sufficient preparation. It just helps you realize and empowers you to realize that, hey, like if so-and-so did it, I can do it. I just have to continue learning about my customer, learning about my market, learning about the problem that I'm solving. continuing across all of these different paths simultaneously and having to ruthlessly prioritize because there's a million things you can spend your time on. And the question is, what should I be spending my time on at this moment? And as an entrepreneur, there aren't really people to tell you that. You'll have investors, you'll have customers, you'll have board members, you'll have colleagues, you'll have co-founders, bosses, people who work for you, etc. But at the end of the day, to some extent, you have to figure it out. And so learning how to learn, I think, is really, really important. And hopefully everyone's doing that right now, if, as part of being in college. But I'd say like the second thing would just be, go out and try it. Just try it. Like, what's the worst that happens? You fail. Guess what? You tried it. You succeeded. Moving on. And so whether that means kind of incorporating. So if anyone is looking to incorporate, by the way, I would highly recommend Stripe Atlas. For $500, they'll set you up with a C Corp in Delaware, bank account, all this great stuff. But so, what do you need to do to start a business, right? Like a real business, right? You need to incorporate. You need to have a bank account. You need to set up payroll. You have to do all of these things that if you've never done them before, you don't know how to do. So you Google it, you figure it out, you go on these different resources. I'm sure EC has a bunch of resources on what to do. You talk to people in your industry, you get obsessed with the problem set and really, really deeply understand why it is that you want to do something and all these different types of things. So I'd say that's not an answer like, go learn SQL. If you want to go do data analytics, go learn SQL. Yeah, sure, I can tell you that. But like, if you're a person who has an entrepreneurial itch, the number one thing I can tell you is like, give it a shot, see what happens, see what gives you energy, what drains your energy. Is that something that you want to do? And being able to understand those things about yourself continuously, I think is really important for being able to set yourself up for success.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. One of our pillars of entrepreneurial thinking at the EC is failing wisely. And that's just something I've always struggled with. That's just not the William and Mary way. I feel like a lot of people that really resonates with a lot of people. And it's definitely a hard thing to learn, but a valuable thing to learn. So kind of along the lines of, passion in your career and things like that. As kind of our last question before we move into the Q&A, do you have any advice for pursuing your passion in kind of a sustainable way without, turning it into work, or maybe any advice for self-reflection in that area?
Yeah, there's a couple different questions in there. It's a really good question. I think that there's a few different threads that I'll pull on there. Which might be unsatisfactory because the answer at the end of the day is like, you got to follow your heart. So one thing I'll say is that, there's certainly any number of people who do a job in order to have the income to pursue their passions on their own time. And, you work to live versus live to work and all these different types of things. And there is an element of, hustle culture, I'll call it, that I think is not very healthy at this moment in time in like society. And I don't envy your generation, which, even just 10 years younger than me, like you grew up in the digital age and like, you don't really have like, a substantial period of time without, screens in all these different ways. But I think the thing that I would say is that learning how to unplug and manage your stress and manage yourself is really important. So whether that's something like creating space to pursue your passion, nights and weekends, if you're, not working in the area that you're passionate about, you can certainly create a side hustle. You can certainly have a side business and have that be something, whether it's a shop on Etsy or anything. There's so many more resources available today to entrepreneurs than there were really even 5 years ago. You can process payments through Stripe. There's any number of kind of online marketplaces. The ability to create both enterprise and consumer businesses is easier today than ever before. So I'd say that if you're interested in essentially kind of figuring out how to find meaning in work, which I'm not sure that's the answer, that was the question specifically, but I would say just explore like different options, whether it's taking an hour lunch break to go to the gym or, being able to start on your baking side hustle and project, nights and weekends, like any of these things are totally valid. It's about what do you enjoy? If the question to some extent is like, how do you find your passion? How do you pursue your passion? I would say rather than looking for it, you might find that it'll find you in unexpected ways. And you might find that by pursuing learning and understanding like, this is what I'm learning right now, and this is what I like and don't like about it, will help you learn about yourself, will help you learn about your passions at the end of the day. And so for those different types of things that essentially are, what is important to me, what gives me energy, all of these different questions aren't really like I answered them today, and so then I don't have to answer them tomorrow or a year or 5 or 10 years from now. They're just really kind of continuous questions that you ask yourself, because you are the only person who knows the answer to those questions. And you are the only person who's really, really looking out for your own best interests, personally and professionally. And so I think really honing in on that and what gives you, what sparks joy, for lack of a better phrase, in your life, personally and professionally, I think that's kind of the biggest thing. If the question to some extent is like, I have an entrepreneurial itch, but I have no idea how to get started. How do I do this on the side while maintaining a job? Again, I'd say just figure out what your interests are from the perspective of like, what rabbit holes do you fall down when you're going on the internet and Googling away? Like what are the things that, capture your attention, whether it's on Twitter or whatever you kids are using these days. So like any number of different things might pique your interest from a subject matter perspective. And so what are those problems? And then I say problems because it's really, really important to have, rather than being a hammer in search of a nail, or, whatever analogy you want to use, like really being clear on why you're doing what you're doing and that there is a need for what you're doing, right? Does the world need yet another photo sharing app? Maybe, depends on the use case, etc. If it's something that's really meant to be family and group centric and all these different types of things, there's really nice, neat, cute products out there. And there's also nothing wrong with starting a small business versus what I would say is like a venture-backed startup, which is just a totally different trajectory. So that's maybe like the one piece that I'll say is also really important to get your head around, because being an entrepreneur, there's a lot of really, it can be glamorous in a lot of ways, and there's a lot of really unsexy stuff as well, right? Like registering in every state that you do business. All of these states have the most mind-boggling, difficult things that look like they were built in the 80s. And yet, we're in 2021 right now. So, and all of these different pieces of workflow that, are things you have to deal with. And so if you want to just start like a little shop around the corner from where you live versus start, a venture-backed business or do something in between on the way, there's any number of ways to pursue your personal passion and your kind of professional passions. And I think understanding those different pathways is, always things that you can explore as you kind of continue down the road of your life.
Yeah, definitely. That's awesome. Thank you so much for that advice and for your insight. So now if everyone wants to turn their videos back on, we're going to open up the conversation to questions and discussion. So if you have a question, just go ahead and unmute yourself and ask away. Yael, if you have a question for us, go ahead and ask it as well.
Sure. Just, I guess maybe a show of hands, like who here is interested in being an entrepreneur someday? Cool. Great to raise your hand. Great to not raise your hand. Good to know about yourself. All right, fire away. Oh, there's a literal hand. So Graham.
Hey, thanks for being here. I'm actually a faculty member at the business school, and I worked with Dick before he retired. And now I get to work with the students at the Entrepreneurship Center. There were so many things that you said that really resonated with me, but one thing in particular I think could be useful for the students to know a little bit more about was a little detail when you said that you realized that PE wasn't for you. I was wondering like what it was that like finally told you that was the case, because I think so often you can kind of be in a situation and maybe you feel like you should just stay there. So that courage to realize that, what was that? Can you tell us a little bit more about how you figured that out?
Yeah. So the one thing that I'll mention is, and so exciting to hear. I totally forgot that Professor Ash retired, but so exciting to hear that folks in different places have a legacy a bit. the thing that I would say is like, for me, it wasn't really finally what made me realize, like on day 2, I realized that this was not going to be the thing that I was going to do for the rest of my life. But the thing that, kept me going, to be honest, at the time is that, I signed up for like a 2-year analyst program, and I was like, I'm going to stick this out. Like I can do anything for 2 years pretty much. Right. So, for me, it was about, and the thing that my mom actually said is that you're getting paid to learn. And that sort of became my mantra. And so if you're being really, really thoughtful about any professional situation within boundaries, right? Like you can learn from any situation. But for me, like at the end of the day, like a lot of the people who work in private equity and a lot of the people who work in finance just weren't really, the same vibe as me, I would say. Like I was the person who checked XKCD every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, was a math major and a total nerd. Like I said, I was a finance nerd in the interview. I'm sure that's half the reason I got it. Who knows? But so, I loved the intellectual curiosity of investing rather than being on the sell side where you're selling a bunch of assets. You have to own it at the end of the day as an investor, which was great and really interesting. But at the end of the day, I was, modeling single well economics for oil and gas companies. We had a couple E&Ps in my portfolio, and I was in Seek in college, and I've been vegetarian for a decade. And I just sort of like had all these different personal things that were, important to me that I didn't feel like were reflected in my job. And so a thing that I learned from that experience is that it is important to me to some extent to have my work be mission driven, right? So for me, that can take any number of, ways that you might want to slice that. You might want to work in the public sector, in the nonprofit sector, any number of different paths that you can have. And so for me, the most direct adjacent next step for me was like, okay, I have this investing skill set. I want to just invest in businesses that make the world a better place instead of oil and gas E&Ps. Sounds good. And so someone used the phrase double bottom line, and I Googled it. And so that's where I first came across DBL Partners, which ended up being the venture capital firm that I worked at after business school. But at the time, it was 2011, 2012. Clean tech had fallen off a cliff. And the reality is that, at the time, they were early investors in Tesla and SolarCity, and now Tesla is a whole different business, a whole different story. But at the time, it was hugely disruptive, like very much an underdog type of bet. And so for me, it was just sort of like a sponge, absorbing as much as I could about any types of companies that piqued my interest. So any type of deal that came across to CCMP, the private equity firm where I worked, that was a little bit, in that realm, I would get myself on those deals and I would get exposure to those deals. I'm like, great, there's wastewater that comes out of oil and gas, but you can actually recycle that. Like that's something that is interesting. And those were sort of the early stage deals that were too early for, frankly, a fund that was $3.5 billion with $10 billion under management. And these were early stage startups. And so that's when I sort of started exploring the world of venture. And there were definitely some people I worked with who were like, you could do venture, but do you really want to be investing in a bunch of guys with a whiteboard and some ideas, and that didn't sound very appealing to me. But as I kind of continue down the path, that has become more and more appealing to me. And there's a lot of different types of venture capital out there, a lot of different stages of investing, but that's really kind of like where I started. And so finding the thing that I liked about the job, owning the asset, having that business investing kind of experience, and then taking it and applying it to different functional areas where I thought, my talents could be better utilized in making the world a better place. At the time, my thought was like, I'm not going to come up with the next brilliant idea, but I can invest in the people who do. And so that was sort of the next logical step. And, networked a ton with people in New York. Clean tech New York scene was a bunch of happy hours. I just went to all of them as much as I could and just really, really hustled and made my way in. One thing I'll say is that for those who are interested in startups and in venture, the earlier stage it is, the more that your search will be a network-based search. So not necessarily as clear within the professional world, but to some extent it is really, really important to understand how to develop relationships and nurture them and keep them over time. And so being able to have those relationships within your network, whether it's a formal network through the William & Mary Alumni Network or any other kind of informal networks that you might have, being able to understand how to not, networking doesn't have to be like a bad word. It doesn't have to be like an intimidating thing. It can just be, this person is interesting. I want to learn more about what they do. Let's grab coffee. And then kind of going from there. And then when people are aware of roles and are aware of what you're interested in, you will then be kind of more top of mind when people are hiring for roles that might be a fit. some unsolicited there too.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. It's good to meet you over Zoom. My question has to do with, I am wondering, I'm a senior, so I'm looking, forward and applying for jobs and things like that. And, a lot of these, even the most, what seemingly are entry-level positions, always are, in their list in their job description, 1 to 3 years professional experience, or even, 3 to 5 years professional experience. And, I know there are other things that I could look for, but these jobs seem like the kind of thing where college students can apply and things like that. And so I'm wondering if you've any thoughts on the way that you can transfer a lot of these skills that you learn, and just things that you learn on your own, to that kind of requirement, and convey a sense of I don't have 3 years of professional experience outside of college, but I am an active learner, and I do have a lot of interest in these things, and I pursue that interest.
Love that question, Sonia. And I want everyone to listen very carefully here. There is a concept called imposter syndrome, which some people might be familiar with and some people might not. And I'm looking, especially at people who have experienced this self-doubt. You have to recognize that that exists, and then put that aside and apply, and just do it. It doesn't cost you much. Just doing it will put you in contention, versus if you don't get that. My mom has a saying, she says, like, if you accept no, you eliminate the 50% chance of yes. Now, yes, no is not usually a 50-50 thing. It's usually a little more complicated than that. But it's true that if you don't take that at bat, if you don't actually step up and put yourself out there, you'll never get the opportunity. So just do it would be the first thing I would say. And so that is something that particularly, women, people of color, people from underrepresented groups across the board, it doesn't matter what your identity kind of is. It is something that is extra important. If you are a person who sort of identifies in a way that makes you feel like, oh, I've got this imposter syndrome, I've got this sort of like question, like, what if, you recognize it, you can go a little easy on yourself, right? You don't have to be like, oh, this imposter syndrome is here again. Like, when am I ever going to get rid of that? Even just recognizing it is a first step that's really important, and be like, I recognize this, and I'm going to apply anyway. And I'm just going to do it, because there's all sorts of stats out there that have, like, people who are like white married men apply for jobs when they have 60% of the qualifications, and women don't do it until they have 120% of the qualifications, or what. There's all sorts of things out there that, exist. And I'm not the person who knows all those stats off the top of my head, but I will tell you that that is a thing. Recognizing it is really important, and then just moving past it. You just have to, you just do it. And so that's true whether you're applying to a job, whether you're in a job asking for a promotion. Negotiate your salaries. I'm especially also looking at all of you who are like, but negotiate how? I'm so just grateful to have a job. That's fine. Be grateful to have a job. Negotiate anyway. I say that, and I'm also personally really bad at negotiating. Like, for my job, I'm pretty good at negotiating deals. But so, like, other things like that though are just all over the place. Those are things that will be blockers for you in life. All opportunities will, have this thing in front of you that is, but look, it's a stop sign. Go, great, find a way around the window. Like, go find the hiring manager, Google it, like, figure out who this person is on LinkedIn, find someone you have in common, reach out to that person, be like, hey, would you mind giving me an intro? Have a really, really thoughtful blurb about yourself with a resume, send that person a nice note. Don't send like a dear hiring manager blanket copy paste. Like, I did this. So to be clear, when I was a senior, like, I used the same cover letter for everything. Don't do that. Cover letters are not really, like, cover letters they're fine, but like, it just depends. There's degrees here, but just think about who the audience is. Think about who the hiring manager is. Think about like what your intended outcome is and what is the path to that outcome. And then work backwards, right? Again, outcomes oriented. I want this job. How am I going to get this job? Okay, great. There is the front door, right? Which is fine, the application, whatever. I can tell you that hiring is really, really hard. And it's something that a lot of people struggle with. A lot of people don't do it well. Like, I have a lot to learn left still with hiring, but thankfully I've been fortunate enough to be, very, very fortunate with some of my hiring. I've hired some really outstanding people. And I honestly pride myself on being willing to take the phone call with someone who might not look like the right fit on paper, but might surprise me, right? Like, and that's something that I think is really important to do for a robust process, particularly if you prioritize DEI, like diversity, equity, and inclusion, and all sorts of other things that are, increasingly top of mind for companies. But it's something that a lot of people just don't know how to do well. And I wouldn't take it personally. It's easy to take it personally because it's like, I put my heart and soul into this job application. This is my dream job, etc. But just don't take it personally. Take it, move on, right? Like you just take those at bats. It's really just a numbers game. And once you understand that and sort of divorce yourself from the like emotional kind of attachment to a certain thing, it becomes a lot easier, a lot more palatable. So still go pursue your passions. If there's a dream job, just go for it. Like honestly, getting into venture, for instance, it's really hard. Getting into impact investing is even more hard. So one of my proudest accomplishments is frankly landing my quote unquote dream job at an impact VC. And the way that I did that was like through, first of all, I'd heard about them in 2011, started there in 2017. And, for some of that, I was in New York and I didn't want to move to San Francisco. And then after business school, I would move to San Francisco, but I like showed up. I'm not advocating for skipping class, but I would skip class to like show up to the classes where this person was showing up as a guest speaker. And I would just grab 60 seconds at the end of the class to just talk to her. And then literally like found 15 minutes on her calendar after she had some speaking engagement that I got on her calendar through her assistant to like walk her to her car. And like, that's when I gave her my resume. It was after like multiple times of having met her, having like listened to every podcast she was on, every article that she was quoted in, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that persistence usually pays off. And so if something is like meant to happen, in general, the universe will send you different paths to getting to that point, whether it's a person who you didn't realize is like a mutual connection or whatever, you just got to keep your head up, keep going at bats, and don't take things personally. For the 1 to 3 year jobs, definitely apply. For the 3 to 5, like tactically, like it may or may not be something that matters, but usually people just put like a year's number that is like not actually a requirement. And like usually it's just a way to filter out the many people who frankly just apply to every single thing on AngelList or every single thing on wherever, right? And it can be a little deafening, frankly, when you see someone who writes a semi-thoughtful form letter, right? That might be a fit, but it's so close to the literally automatically copy-pasted thing that you must have applied to like thousands of jobs with this thing that doesn't make any sense, so like just an inkling more customization, just like a smidge more like this is a thing that I did for you. And then, being able to do that in a way that is scalable, don't spend 2 hours on an email. Like I have done that. I have done that so many times. Don't do it. You can spend 2 hours on the first draft of the email, and then you should be spending no more than 20 minutes on each of the ones that you send after that. Just ship it. Do it. You'll get those at bats. You'll get the interviews. And then it's just a funnel management game. I've got like this Excel sheet that I probably has like hundreds of jobs in it that I've kept at different points in time. Many of them have just like expired that I just put in there from like 4 or 5 years ago that are, it's like almost like my Pinterest board of jobs. It's just a Google sheet, but it's like things that's, when I, had a moment of like, but what am I interested in? I'm like, oh, here's some things that were interesting to me at some point, just like put them out there and put yourself out into the world. And worst that happens is you get rejected from a job. It's not the end of the world. It has nothing to do with you. I mean, it might have a little to do with you, but like, don't hold it close to your heart.
Thank you. That was really affirming. Quite literally gave me the push to send that email tonight. So thank you.
Do it. Great. I'm very happy to hear that. It's true for all of you. And if it's not true today, it'll probably be true at some point. So,
We have time for maybe a couple more questions, if anyone has any.
I have a question. You mentioned how for like you have hired like many people for your job. I was wondering what you look for in a candidate and what types of experience that you're looking for.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that there's usually the experience will vary by the job that I'm hiring for. So that's not really like a one answer for that. But the thing that I'm looking for in general, and again, it really depends a lot on the company that I'm working at, on the role that I'm hiring for, et cetera. But a lot of the things that I look for are a lot of the things that I, have been talking about, like growth mindset, right? In terms of sort of intangible things, I'd say that for me, it's really important to demonstrate that you're a person who is, good at learning to some extent, like a person who can learn, not just do the job today, but learn what you'll need to do on the job tomorrow. So that can sometimes mean, does this person seem like they're coachable, right? Versus set in their ways. It doesn't mean that you can't be like firm and having all sorts of kind of conviction behind what you stand for and what you're looking for. That's totally fine. Strongly believe in that. It's great. But I think being a person who is coachable and doesn't come across as like too set in your ways or not able to learn and grow with the role with the company, it's particularly important, I think, in early stage startups, which is where I've spent most of my time hiring. I think in other types of skills and things that I might look for, culture fit is not really a phrase that I love to use actually, but making sure that someone, just because you kind of want to look for culture add, you don't want someone who looks the exact same as the 5 other people in the room. You want someone who can add to the room, but someone who is like complementary and will work well with others in this environment, right? So certain cultures might be very much like heads down, FaceTime in the office matters, having the ability to speak sternly to people and whatever. Like there's all sorts of places that are like known for that. Bridgewater, for instance, famously, there was an HBS case on that. But so that's a culture that some people might thrive in. And that's a culture that other people might despise. Like they would be dying inside every day in that type of environment. And that's not a good thing for, switching somebody who thrives in this and this, switching them, it's not good for anybody. Nobody's going to enjoy that. Not that individual, not their coworkers. It's a lose-lose situation. So I think finding the place where, you're able to find peers who are of similar, it's not even just values, but it's kind of like mission, vision, values. It's like, is there alignment here? Is there a complementary opportunity to have someone who can add to the team, learn from the team, be good for the role today and in the future? So those are a couple of the different things. And then I think tactically in terms of startups, it's, there's all sorts of people who might look for experience in an industry, experience in a specific role, experience in certain skill set areas, whether it's, a certain coding language or a certain, other type of tool that you might have the ability to use. Those are kind of tactical things, but those are also learnable things, right? Like you can just be like, give me 2 weeks, I got this, right? So there's all sorts of things like that are degrees of, important in different types of roles. So, that might be a little bit of a disappointing answer in terms of the specifics being very, very dependent on the roles themselves. But I think some of the other things are things that I will always be me generally in the roles where I will be hiring for. And so the way that I like to operate, for instance, is very much direct, very much like a person who, loves to coach and loves people who are able to learn, but don't necessarily like require a lot of management. That's kind of like my personal style of the way the things that I look for. And that won't be true for all roles necessarily that I hire for, but those are the true things typically of roles where I'm hiring today. And, people who, there's like certain people that'll work better in that type of environment and certain people who won't. So anyway, those are some answers for you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
We have time for maybe one more question. If no one has a question, I actually have a really quick kind of random question. Just you talking about sending like cold emails and stuff. What do you recommend putting in the subject line for those emails when you don't know the person you're emailing, they don't know you, they probably get tons of emails like this?
Yeah, that is a good question. I think something that would pique their interest, which again is not a generic thing, but something that is going to catch their specific attention. Find some commonality, something that might, catch their attention. Really, really the biggest thing is if you can find someone in common who can connect you. It is worth it, or finding someone else in an organization who you might have an avenue into, because it is just so much easier and greater chance of success, but finding some sort of commonality. So like I mentioned earlier, like the cold email that I actually got a response to, and I sent plenty of cold emails like this that did not get a response, but it said William & Mary alumna, like W&M alumna interested in green tech investing. I didn't say clean tech because like the Kleiner Perkins Green Growth Fund called it green tech investing. I didn't send that email point blank to like every single other person. I literally looked at Ryan Popple's bio. I looked at everyone's bio actually at the Kleiner Green Growth Fund and found out that he went to William & Mary. And so that's why I reached out to him specifically. But I did this for so many VC funds, so many, like just, I had a whole spreadsheet. There were like 40 different funds that had invested in different companies I thought were interesting. Some of those funds were more mission driven than others. And I targeted those funds and I looked at all of their team pages and looked at every single person. If there was a person who liked rock climbing, I would have reached out to that person and said like, hey, I like rock climbing or something along those lines. Anyone that will respond to anything that you might be able to say that might be genuine and pique their interest is what will give you a better chance of success. Of course, keeping in mind that connections that are direct are going to be more likely. Through the alumni network, through any number of things. Connections don't have to be like as like, you know, clear as like a William & Mary thing. It can be any number of things, but reaching out to someone on LinkedIn can be really successful, if not email. Oh, here's a pro tip. So when you connect with someone on LinkedIn, you can actually click on contact info and it'll have their email there, just so you all know that. So people may or may not be willing to connect with you on LinkedIn, but when you go in the upper portion of their, if you go on LinkedIn, you'll see there's just a button that says contact info, unless they've proactively removed their email, which most people have not. Then they might just have their Twitter handle or something like that. But most people, unless they're like super, super famous, have not. Also guess people's emails. It's really not that complicated. Usually if you can find one email, just guess it. Like, and you can try first initial last name, first dot last, like just first. If it's a startup in most cases, like first at, this is not rocket science. Just like if you can find somebody's email in the organization, usually it's going to follow the same formula and you can send out multiple emails to different variations of the exact same email address. So those are some more kind of cold emailing pro tips.
Awesome. Thank you. I've never thought about
like
that.
You could say like, I listened to this podcast that you were on. I thought it was really interesting. I thought this thing that you said was really interesting, right? Like any number of things. You can come up with something that is like actually something you have in common, but really anything.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm with Graham in the chat. I love these hacks. That's really good advice. And I definitely haven't heard advice like that before. So, but we're coming to the end of our time. But I just wanted to thank you again, Yael, for all that you shared with us and for taking the time to speak with us. I really appreciate it.